you've been a lawyer, you've been a student, you know all the things words can do. Why have you chosen poetry?
For me, it's just a way of translating the world, and I see a poet's job as just living a life and writing about what they observe in life. And if you have a love of language, and I do, and even when I was a lawyer, I love language, and language was doing different things for me in that context. And when I write a poem, I sort of think it's an organism that really suffuses the world, and then I try and get that into words.
So it's perception. A poet needs very acute perception, a missing skin perhaps?
I think partly it's that, but I also just think we listen. Yes, I think we listen, we observe, we use all our senses, and we are porous to the world around us. We can't just live on our desks or in a library. We have to actually live the world in order to be able to write about it.
How do you know when a poem has been achieved, when something you've written is no longer in the process but has arrived? When is it a poem?
That's a really, really difficult question, but I think for me it's the question of listening to the poem, what the poem wants to be. And I always find that when a poem goes awry, it's because I haven't listened to the poem. And what I need to do is really listen to the poem, and the poem, the brain of the poem, will tell me what it needs to be. Sometimes it will want to be a formal poem, and sometimes it will need to be a free verse poem. And it's very difficult as a poet. You can't really dictate to the poem. The poem has to be the person that tells you what it's going to be.
So the poem has its own voice.
The poem has its own voice.
And you are then a channel? I mean, we're getting into quite ancient ideas of the poet as a prophet, or as a vessel through which inspiration speaks.
And I don't want it to sound like it's some sort of mysterious act. But I think there is partly that in a poem. There is a reason why certain poems will be inert and dead on the page, even though you've done everything that you can. You know, you've learnt your craft and you've applied the rules and you've done everything. And then there will be other poems that just, I don't know, that just magically are energised on the page. And I think there is a sort of a mystery to it as well.
Some of the poems that you write are going to be read by people saying, well, that's a Punjabi Sikh woman from London writing about her family. That's the kind of thing she would write. How do you respond to that? That it's, you're just representing a stratum or a section of society?
We live in a diverse world, and I happen to be Sikh Punjabi, and I also happen to be a poet. Some of my poems are autobiographical, and they talk about my mother's hair and my mother's bangles, lots of poems about my mother and inheritance, and I'm very proud of that. But I also feel like I'm not a one-trick pony. I also, I was born in this country. I was born in London, and I learnt the canon, and so that infuses my poetry as well. And so I'm a complex woman with. I've got children. I'm Sikh Punjabi, yes, but I hope that I can show that I'm, a varied poet.
You talk about the canon. The canon to you is who?
Well, when I was at school, I had very, very good English teachers, and a lot of the poems that I learnt at the time, learnt off by heart, Keats and Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath, and also poets like John Donne and Shakespeare. They inform my work just as much as poets from the East, the poets like Ghalib, the ghazals, they inform my work as well, and in some ways I'm sort of a mixture and a fusion of all those poets together, and somehow I managed to write with all these influences. One
final question. Claudia Rankin also thought of becoming a lawyer. You actually were a lawyer. Is there something that we're missing here? Are many of our lawyers actually poets?
Do you know what, I meet such a huge number of lawyers that actually write poems, and I think it's the idea of they're very interested, I think, in language, And I also think the idea of oralcy, the idea of reading and performing a poem and having something that's on a page performed is something that sort of interests people. So I definitely think there are some connections to be made.